I'm going to show you when we get done, but you have it says program, and there will be a program right there that says fix calc. You highlight fix calc and you hit enter twice because they can't help you at all with the calculator. They can't do anything for you. But that fix calc program will make all that other stuff show up that needs to show up for you. So, and that's why I put it on all of your calculators so that, or had them put it on there so that you can make sure you have it. So, you've got to do that as soon as you go in there, is you go down, get on top of the fixed calc program and hit enter to choose it, enter to do it, and that's going to make all that extra stuff show up.
Would that happen? Will you have that on our formula sheet?
Yeah, and I'm going to show you where it is.
Okay.
So, when I do linear regression, it comes up and says, under linear regression, it comes up and says, hey, linear regression is going to help you find this, y equals ax plus b. And this is what you're going to use for A, and this is what you're going to use for B. So the answer to this question is going to be that y equals 0.0789x minus 0.535978, however many places they tell you to round it to. So all I'm doing is taking that value and plugging in for A, and I'm taking that value and plugging in for B. Whoop, there it is. So they're saying, here's the equation, plug in the value for A, plug in the value for B, and the only reason I made this negative is because that's negative. Had that been positive, I would have made that a positive. And my math lab is going to tell you how many places to round to, and your test is multiple choice, so they're all going to be rounded to the same part. Now, the next thing says, find the correlation coefficient. What letter did I tell you is the correlation coefficient?
R.
The R. So right here, find a color I haven't used, right here is the R value. So the R value is a 0.587. Then it says, is there a relationship? Tell me about the R value.
There's
Positively moderate.
some relationship.
It's sort of, kind of. It's not strong.
Moderate.
It's kind of moderate, not strong at all. Is it positive or negative?
Positive.
It's positive. Okay. Now, it says make a prediction of the death rate if someone is driving 30 miles per hour. So, to make a prediction, we have to type the equation into y equals and then go to the table. Go to the table. T-A-B-L-E. So, we just came up with the equation, y'all. So, we're going to go to our y equals button, and we're going to type in that equation.
You don't have to do all that. When you hit linear regression, you can go to variables.
Yeah,
and
see,
put
I
in
suck it over. I do the VARs. Do y'all want to do the suck over, or do y'all want to type it in? I'll show you both ways. You do the VARs EQ number 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll show you both ways. You can either type it in, and I do both ways. You can type it in, and I don't type in the whole thing. 0789. Here's your X button. Your X is right beside your alpha. Minus 0.535978. So I just manually typed in 3 or 4 or 5 places behind the decimal. And it's just going to keep scrolling. Go with me? That's one way, and I'm not finished yet, but here's another way that you can do it. This is how Barrett was saying. If you go to your y equals, it's going to be VARs, number 5, because you're sucking over a statistics problem. over to EQ, and hit enter. And what that did is it was like copy and paste. I did vars because I'm sucking over a variable equation. I went down to statistics, number 5, because I'm sucking over a variable equation. I went over to EQ because I'm sucking over equation, and then I hit linear equation because I'm sucking over a linear equation. But when you do that, you just have to remember that you have to go to where you're sucking over first. So I've got to say, I want to be here, because that's where I want to copy and paste it. So I do vars, I go down to number 5 because I'm sucking over statistics, I go over to EQ because I'm sucking over equation, and then, it's regression equation, not linear equation, regression equation, and then I hit enter. And when I hit enter, and I back up, what it did is it sucked over the entire, look, there's the blah, 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 x plus a negative blah, 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 blah. It sucked over the whole thing. Okay? Now, we need to make a prediction. Now, for your prediction, you have to go to the table. In order to go to the table, and this is something you've got to remember to do on your test too, so I want to go over it. That's kind of cattywampus, Jim. Let's set up our table. To set up your table, it's right here. It's called table set. So we're going to hit blue and we're going to hit table set. So second table set. The main thing when you're doing table set is that you want that very first one to be in ask mode. So you get on top of the word ask and hit enter. So I did second window. And what that does, y'all, is that when I go to my table now, my table is right above the graph. When I go second table, I can now type in data. So when I go second table, I can now type in my data. When I had it in auto mode, just to show you, when I had it in auto mode and I go to my table, it's automatically going to give me numbers. And I don't want to have to scroll to 100 miles an hour. I just want to type in 100. So when I go to second table set, I want that to be, that very first one only, I want it to be in ask mode, so that when I go to my table and it says, make a prediction if somebody is going 100 miles an hour. Well, if I go back up here for a second, this is a table. That first column was speed. So 100 miles an hour is going to go in that first column. So when I type 100 miles an hour here, it's going to end up giving me the death rate. So for this next question, I'm going to type in, this one was a 30 mile an hour. So let's do the 30 mile an hour. So if I type in 30, there's the death rate. So if somebody is going 30 miles an hour, this should be their death rate. My next question says, what is a prediction if someone's driving 100 miles an hour? What do you think is going to happen to the death rate?
It's going to go up.
It's going to go up. The faster you drive, the more likely you are to die. So I'm going to put in 100. So this says, come on. The death rate of someone going 100 is going to be that. What's the prediction of a death rate going 0? Now, does that really make any sense? That doesn't make any sense because you're not going to be driving 0. So here's my answer, but it does not make sense because not driving 0. All right, now, let me skip this one and let me go to this one. Find the residual for Britain, okay? So if I go up to the top, Britain is 70 miles an hour. That's what they said, is 70 miles an hour. So if I come down here, the residual is what we observed minus the predicted. So where do you think 70 is going to go? Observed or predicted?
Observed.
Observed. So 70 is going to be my observed. How am I going to get my predicted?
It's gonna be Y value or
You're going to go to your table and get it from your table. So if I go in there and I type in 70, hold on, let me do, this is 4.9899. Didn't mean to type in 70, I meant to type in its death rate. What is its death rate at 70? For Britain, 3.5. Is Britain's death rate. So the residual is going to be 3.5 minus the 4.9899. Somebody with a calculator. Negative something. 3.5 minus, who?
Negative 1.4899.
Yep. That's gonna be your residual. We had a lot going on in that problem, but we're gonna do a couple more just to practice. All right, here's one with less data. You're gonna be finding less stuff, just to give you a practice. It says by hand, y'all, we never do anything by hand. For this one, I'm telling you what the L1 and L2 are. Sometimes I give it to you across, sometimes I give it to you up and down. Draw a scatter diagram, compute the correlation coefficient, and tell me if there's a relationship. Sign in. Okay.
It never.
And James, if you'll pass it back to Derek. Did you sign in, James? I don't think you did. Draw a scatter diagram, compute the correlation coefficient, and determine whether there's a linear relationship between X and Y. Thank you. Last day of signage. This time you didn't have to decide the L1 and L2, I gave it to you. So you're gonna do stat edit, enter the data into L1 and L2. This time you don't have a lot of data. We're gonna do stat calc, and we're gonna do linear regression for this one. The first thing they wanted to know was the scatter diagram. So we go to second y equals, make sure that the scatter diagram is picked. So this kind of just shows you, and then we do the zoom 9. And then the correlation coefficient is when we do the linear regression, our correlation coefficient should be a negative 0.993. And then is there a linear relationship between these two?
Yes.
Yes. What kind of relationship is it? A negative. So there is a linear relationship, and I would say that it's negative. We good?
How did you know there was a linear relationship?
Because it's close to 1 or negative 1.
So I would look at the A for that?
The R value.
Oh, just the R determines?
Yeah, the R value determines if it's a linear relationship. If it's close to 1 or negative 1,
Okay,
it's
so,
going to be linear.
and you said this is a negative linear relationship?
And this one is a negative.
Okay.
Yep. All right. The next problem talks about, yes, sir.
I don't see an R at all on my calculator.
Okay, do you have the fixed calc program on your calculator?
He just put it on.
Okay, so hit program, go down to fixed calc, hit the down button, get on top of fixed calc, and hit enter twice. And now do stat calc, linear regression. Whoop, there it is. And you'll have to do the same thing when you take a test. You're going to have to do that fixed calc to make those magically show up. All right. The next problem talks about bears. All the cute little bears of the world. Polar bears, brown bears, black bears, sloth bears. And this one's a very similar problem. This time I did not tell you what your L1 and L2 is going to be. Does length determine weight, or does weight determine length?
Length determines weight.
Length determines weight. Okay? So, we have a couple of questions. And this one has a lot of data, so we're just going to kind of walk through this one because it's the same step. It says, which variable is the explanatory variable? Your explanatory variable is going to be your L1. So what is going to be our L1? Length. So this is going to be my L1, this is going to be my L2. It's not necessarily the order that it's written. And then it says draw a scatter diagram. So we would put in our L1, we would put in our L2, we would do our zoom 9. We good? Then it says determine the linear correlation, which is going to be your R value. And for this problem, our R value is going to be 0.704 when we do the R value. You can play with this one at home if you want to. Does a linear relationship exist? Usually if it's 0.7 or higher, we say yes. What kind of correlation is it? Positive. All right, so that's just another one if you want to play. All right, this one gives you the linear regression, and it calls it least squares regression, but this is the line of best fit. So it gave it to you. It says predict the exam score of a student who studied 2 hours. So where do we go to predict? We go to the table, right? But in order for the table to work, we got to go to y equals. And we can't suck it over because we haven't done anything. So for this one, we have to type into y equals. So I'm going to go to y equals first, clear out what's in there, and I'm going to type in. And remember, your X button is right beside your alpha button. So I typed into my y equals, because my table is based on my y equals. And now I'm going to go to my table. And I'm just going to scroll down because I got a bunch of junk in there right now. Now, they told me in the problem what x and y represents. We're comparing two things, the relationship between the time they study and their exam score. Okay? So, x is going to be the time they study. So if I want to know 2 hours, 2 is going to be the time they study. So this is saying if they study for 2 hours, this is the hours they study, and this is going to be their grade. So if they study for 2 hours, what should we expect them to make on their exam? 65.7 or 65 point whatever they tell me to round it to. We good? Mm-hmm. All right. Now, the next thing it does is says interpret the slope. The formula is y equals ax plus b. So the slope is the number in front of the x. So what does that slope mean?
Well, it's positive.
It's positive. So that means your grade's going to do what?
Increase.
Go up.
The more amount of the hours you study.
Perfect.
About
So if you don't study at all, what's your grade going to be?
a 53.
53.
So if your time is 0, your grade's going to be 53.
Yeah.
If your time is 1, your grade's going to increase by 6 points. If your time is 2, your grade's going to increase by 12 points. So for every hour you study, your grade should increase 6 1/3 points, right? So if you don't study at all, you should expect to make a 53. But for every hour you study, your grade should increase a little over 6 points. If this was negative, your grade would go down. Make sense? All right. This was the part A. This is what we did for part A. We went into the table, got the 65.7. Now we're talking about the B. A is 6.33. For each additional hour a student's been studying, their grade will increase an average of, y'all are so stinking smart. Okay, let's go to C. What is the average score of a student who did not study? 53. Now, how could we get that off the table?
Plug 0.
Plug 0 in here, or 0 in there, and it would give me that. So I could have done 0 in there, which would mean no hours of studying, is another way to do it. But we're smart, we don't need to know that. So if I pull that down, I would get 5303. Push that off to the side. All right, let's look at question D. A student who studied for 5 hours for the exam scored an 81. Is this student's exam score above or below what's predicted?
Below,
Above.
so because the average.
So if we plug a 5 into my table, you get an 84. And he made an 81, so he made below what we predicted him to make. So if I come down, if you plug the 5 into the table, he was supposed to make an 84, but he made an 81, so he made below what he should have made. Now, I added another question. Interpret the y-intercept. Now, the y-intercept means where does my line cross the y-axis, which means 0, some. Now, we've already talked about 0, some.
Steve Boyd.
Okay? So, what does this first column mean? The x, which represents what?
0.
How much time he spent studying?
How much time he spent studying, and what does the second column mean? The Y or
Grade.
the grade? And so we've already said that if he makes a 0,
He's gonna make.
I mean, he studies 0, he's gonna make a 53. So they just want, and we already talked about that, they just say that if he makes a 0, does 0 studying, he's gonna make a 53. We really talked about that, we just didn't call it the y-intercept. All right. This last one talks about your credit score, and it's huge that y'all have a good credit score because the interest rate depends on your credit score. And your credit score is how much does the world trust you to pay off your bills. So if you pay your bills off every month, your credit score is going to be high, and they trust you. If you don't pay your bills off every month, your credit score is going to be low, and they're going to jack up your interest rate. So if you have a low credit score, they jack up your interest rate because they don't trust you. If you have a high credit score, they're like, oh, you pay your bills off. We trust you. We're not going to charge you much interest. So this tells me credit scores versus interest rate. Now, your credit score causes your interest rate. This causes this to happen. So, first thing they want to know is the regression line. So we do our L1, L2, 1 bar stats, and that gave me this. Y'all good? Interpret the slope and y-intercept. So, kind of doesn't make sense here. This represents your credit score. Can anybody have a credit score of 0? No. So for this problem, slope does not make sense because you can't have a credit score of 0. So for this problem, credit scores go from 300 to 850. So credit scores, you can't have a credit score of 0, so therefore it doesn't make sense in this problem. Predict the interest rate of a person who has a 723. So what would I do for that? Put in your y equals and then go to your table and type in 723. Suppose Bob has a FICO score of 680 and he's offered a 8.3. So what I did is I typed in a 680, and in my calculator I got out a 9.4. He was offered a 8.3. He should take the 8.3 because it's below what he expected. Now, if I look for just a second at what we've done so far today and what's on your test. Determine and interpret z-scores. Data minus mean over standard deviation. And what does it mean? I'm 2 jumps below, I'm 1 jump above, how do they relate? You have 2 of those. Interpret percentiles. My child's head was in the 75th percentile. How many people had bigger heads than her? 25. How many people had smaller heads than her?
75.
Determine and interpret quartiles. If I say find the second quartile or the third quartile, you should be able to do that. 1 bar stats, look at the second page. Calculator. Calculate the interquartile range, Q3 minus Q1. It's on the formula sheet. Apply the definition of an outlier. Okay, what does an outlier mean? And I may even say, what is the outlier? You may have to find the lower fence, upper fence. Apply the definition of response and predictor variables. I may say, does the speed determine the depth, or does the depth determine the speed? Speed determine depth, or depth determine speed? Speed determines depth. Calculate the linear correlation coefficient. What am I telling you to find?
R.
The R value. Find the least squares regression line. That's the y equals ax plus b. Find the least regression squares line, which is the y equals ax plus b, and use it to make a prediction. So you've got to do the y equals ax plus b, plug it into y equals, then go to your table and type it in. You've got 2 of those. Now, your calculator is not the calculator that you're using, so you're gonna have to do the fixed calc. You're gonna have to know to go to y equals, you're gonna have to know to turn stat plot on. You're gonna have to know to pick the box plot, or pick the histogram, or pick the scatter plot. You're gonna have to know to, what else have we done?
Put that thing on ask.
You put the table, put it on ask, yeah. Put that thing